I spent a small fortune and 2 decades at sea to learn one thing. While most cruises are brilliant, unfortunately, some cruises are a waste of money. I'm sharing in this the 7 cruises I'll never book again and why you shouldn't either. Welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, and as I pay for all my cruises at the going fares via my travel agent, you can always be confident my tips and recommendations are always unbiased and frank. The first cruise that I regret doing and have stopped doing are short taster cruises. When I first started cruising over 2 decades ago, I thought that these short 2 to 3 night cruises would be perfect for testing out a line to see if they were ideal before committing to a longer cruise. But I found in the last few years they no longer are. The low price, and as they usually run over a weekend, have turned them into inexpensive, party-focused getaways, attracting groups of people looking to drink a lot and let their hair down. They're no longer helpful for assessing a cruise line because their typical passenger doesn't go on these, and the lines don't run their usual activities, program, and full services. For example, the last one I did and regret doing was taking my mum on a Cunard Queen Mary II short taster cruise to let her experience Cunard. It wasn't anything like Cunard. It was full of rowdy party people, way younger, and not a typical passenger mix. They didn't run the full Cunard program of lectures, dancing, and so on. And it was really rather overwhelming for my mum, who was none the wiser what cruising Cunard was really like. If you do want to go on a reasonably priced weekend party cruise, then do look at these as options. But if you want to go to find out if a cruise line is right for you, then don't. The second cruise that I regret going on, and was both my longest and most expensive cruise I've been on, was that of a world cruise. I did 7 weeks of a world cruise. That's 50 nights at sea on Queen Victoria, sailing from Southampton all the way to Sydney, Australia. It looked fantastic when I looked at the itinerary because I was going to be transiting the Panama Canal, visiting lots of places in the Azores, the United States, South America, Hawaii, Fiji, New Zealand, and Australia. However, once I was on it, I realized that the problem with a world cruise is there's an enormous amount of sea days and very few ports. In those 50 days, we only went to 12 ports. So on average, we had 3 sea days for every 1 port. It was a costly and very time-consuming way of not seeing very much of the world. It made me decide that I would never do a full world cruise. Do I want to travel around the world? Absolutely. But if I was going to do that, I wouldn't go on one ship all the way around the world. I would basically pick a series of connecting trips, each of which offer a more intensive look at the region. I would strongly encourage you to think very carefully about world cruises and look at the number of ports versus the amount of sea days to see whether it's really going to show you all of the world that you want to see. I also definitely regret going on maiden ships and new cruise lines at or close to launch. For example, I went on the completely new line Explorer Journeys early on after launching. While the ship was beautiful, many things weren't running nor working as it should be. They were still working out how to get things to run smoothly, the crew was inexperienced, hadn't really gelled, and they were unfamiliar with the ship and the new systems. The program and entertainment weren't bedded in or right for the passengers. The dining and food was erratic and inconsistent. I should have waited until it was bedded in and sorted before spending my money. I found the same with new ships, especially on maiden voyages, in even long established lines. First, because booking a maiden voyage is risky as they often get cancelled or actually supplanted by another. For example, I booked on Cunard's Queen Anne maiden voyage, but it got cancelled because the ship was running late being completed and delivered. While friends of mine had a very different issue because after booking on the maiden voyages of Icon of the Seas and then Star of the Seas, they missed out because those ships were actually ready early, and so other cruises were run before their supposed maiden voyages, so they didn't get to go on the maiden voyage. As well as avoiding maiden voyages, I also avoid going on ships close to entering service. I did eventually go on Queen Anne a few cruises after it did finally enter service. It wasn't great at all. The crew hadn't bedded in, the systems weren't operating properly, the food was erratic, slow, and often cold. I now only go on new ships after they have had plenty of time to bed in. Linked to this topic, other cruises I avoid are on ships coming out of refit or just before they go into refit. For example, I went on Celebrity Solstice on a New England and Canada cruise just before it went into refit. I found the ship wasn't in great shape, with issues left and areas looking shabby, because the line and the crew knew it was booked in for work, and so it wasn't really worth focusing on fixing problem areas. However, I also found ships coming out of refit can also be an issue, and so avoid the first few cruises after this. For example, I went on MSC Divina when it came out of a refit, heading across the transatlantic to do its season in Miami. As everything had not been completed, there were workmen on board, areas were closed, there was a smell of paint all over, and some things just weren't working properly because they hadn't been fixed. So I don't book on a ship when it comes out of refit. I wait for a while to ensure everything is sorted. Another cruise that I avoid booking is when there's a charter on board the ship. Again, a learning from a poor cruise experience. I'm not talking about when there's an entire charter of a whole ship, things like Star Trek, Hallmark movie, or other themed charters, because of course I'd be going on those fully understanding what I was signed up for. But I'm talking about when the cruise has a major charter on board. This is not always obvious ahead of time, so I have a tip on how to check for that shortly. But let me give you an example. A cruise I regret going on was on Regent Seven Seas Navigator in the Caribbean. Once on board, I found that over half the ship was being chartered by a corporate client. Many venues were closed off during the trip because they had meetings or events. The ship and cruise lacked the usual buzz and vibe. It wasn't the usual Regent passenger mix, and usual cruise highlights like even the captain's welcome party was therefore sparsely attended. Of course, it could have been even more disruptive of a charter, like people I know who found themselves on a rather rowdy motorcycle club part-ship charter recently. Nowadays, for all my cruises, before booking, I put in the name of the ship and the dates into a simple Google search, as that usually will throw up if there's a charter on board that ship. I also check a site called themecruisefinder.com. Another cruise I regret going on is those with too little time in port, as I'm not getting to see the sights and the towns. I've learned to always check the arrival and departure time by port in the itinerary before booking. For example, I went on a Panama Canal cruise on Holland America from Miami to San Diego, and of course, while I was excited to go through the Panama Canal, I was also excited about many new and exotic places it was going to go to also. However, once on the trip, as I'd not checked before booking, I realized that we were spending almost no time in most of those new and interesting ports. For example, in Cabo San Lucas, Hultuco, and Puerto Vallarta, we only spent a morning there, so I didn't get time to really explore and experience the sights in those places. In Puerto Quetzal, Guatemala, we were only there until early afternoon, which made getting to and from the historic and main attraction of the city Antigua tight and rather stressful, because it's a 2-hour ride there and back. So like most people, I just ended up spending it at the small cruise port area with market stalls. So that was a big learning. Look very carefully, not only the ports you're going to, but how long you're spending in the ports. In another example, friends of mine booked a bucket list Alaska cruise, but made a poor choice booking a Norwegian Bliss cruise from Seattle. They were so disappointed as they had almost no time at all in the ports to see the sights. In Juneau, they were only there from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., which was too late for most tours and exploring, missing going up onto the glaciers and going dog sledding like I had done when I was there. They were only at Icy Strait Point from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. and Ketchikan from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. Those early arrivals and departures severely limiting what they could see and do, unlike my time in those places. So I avoid any cruise that isn't giving me substantial amount of time in a port. Although this may be more limiting for you based on your job or if you have children, I avoid and regret going on cruises in the major cruising regions of the Caribbean, Mediterranean, and Alaska at peak times like school and major holidays. Not only are they the most expensive time to cruise there, but ships these days are now sailing over capacity at these times, with many cabins holding 3 or 4 people, usually of course families, making the venues and the ship more crowded and frantic than at other times. After going on a Princess Cruises trip, which is known for being a couple, slightly more older, adult-focused cruise line, I went there to Alaska with them in late June, and having had a rather unprincess experience because it was full of families, venues are overrun, I realized as I do not need to go in peak times, I should not. Or if I do, I should go on an adult-only line. So on a return trip, for example, I went on Viking to Alaska because that was 18 plus. But certainly for me, I avoid going in the peak season and try and use shoulder periods because it tends to be cheaper and less crowded on the ships and in the ports. For example, having gone to Japan once in March, April time, which is the peak blossom period, it was expensive and very busy. So instead, I returned next time in October, which is not peak season and was way cheaper and less busy. Another cruise I wish I had avoided, and make sure I do so now, is in those regions at the times it's susceptible to dramatic weather issues. This may sound obvious, but as I discovered, it's easy to get wrong. For assuming because a cruise is running there at that time means it's a good time to go is actually a bad assumption. For example, I went on an Oceania Riviera trip from Sydney to Papeete, Tahiti, visiting Fiji, Tonga and the French Polynesian Islands, but I hadn't thought through the weather. It was December, which is the rainy season there, and we were chased by a storm the whole time. For us, it was a little bit hit and miss. We did have some good days. We only missed one port and had some rough sea stretches. However, the trip after me, returning to Sydney, missed 4 ports and it rained basically all the time. Hurricanes in the Caribbean and the typhoon season in Asia are very disruptive, so I never go on those cruises in those seasons because they can be unpredictable and subject to cancellations and missed ports. But while these are the cruises that I regret doing and recommend you avoid, what are the best and must-do cruises that everybody should do? Join me over in this video to find out why. See you over there.